Hey, everybody, it's me, Jason Lavelle from the Unafraid podcast, and I am joined today by the wonderful Georgie Williams. How are you today, Georgie?
Not too shabby in yourself, Jason.
I'm doing pretty good. I've had all my coffee for the day already, so I'm doing really well.
Good to
Um,
go.
Now, you guys know that when you see me on this screen, I'm typically doing something silly or goofy or funny, but we're actually talking about something serious today. We're going to be talking about J.K. Rowling's tweet that she sent on the 19th, which is just 2 days ago now.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm going to read that for you, and then I want to talk about why this is an important thing. So, J.K. Rowling tweeted, "Dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like. Sleep with any consenting adult who will have you. Live your best life in peace and security. But force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real? Hashtag I stand with Maya. Hashtag this is not a drill." Now, just looking at this, I think that for a lot of people, we might not understand what's going on here. This seems like it might be a reasonable tweet to some people. In fact, Luke Skywalker himself, Mark Hamill, had actually liked this tweet, and then somebody wrote him and said, "Hey, did you know that this is a transphobic tweet?" And he responded with, I actually didn't. I read the first four lines, and I thought it was a positive statement. And didn't even realize that there was something transphobic going on. And I think that a lot of people might not. So I'm actually going to turn this over to Georgie, because I'd like to understand a little bit better what J.K. Rowling was saying with this tweet.
Okay, so for those of us in the trans and gender variant community, this tweet wasn't so much of a surprise. Many of us were aware of the fact that she followed Twitter accounts run by trans exclusionary radical feminists, or TERFs, as they're known, who are individuals who consider themselves feminists but don't believe that trans women are women and trans men are men. So using the term feminism is dubious in this context. So when Rowling came out with this tweet, it was a surprise to some, but not a surprise to others. So this is obviously in response to Maya Frustata's case. Maya Frustata was an individual working at a think tank whose contract was not renewed after she made transphobic comments online. She was saying that male-bodied individuals could never be women. And so evidently transphobic, but she ruled that it was a lawful and reasonable dismissal and that her comments had been damaging and dangerous. So J.K. Rowling standing in support of this is frustrating, because what it's doing is it is reducing down trans issues to sex again, when she's talking about how people can't change sex and things like that, which was Maya Frustata's standpoint on this. What it's doing is it's saying that that gender identity is something that's biological. Now, sex and gender identity are terms that are used synonymously, especially in a Western context, when actually gender identity is much more than that. It is predominantly psychological, but it's also an interplay between how you perceive your own body, some aspects of your biology, especially aspects of your biology that are responding to your environment, so neurochemistry. It is to do with your perceptions of masculinity and femininity within your own culture, and just an internal sense of self. So it's hard to reduce gender down to one thing, whereas biology, on the other hand, when we're talking about sex and biology being these, two immutable things, that's not the case either. There's a fantastic book actually by Dr. Cordelia Fine called Testosterone Rex, R-E-X, like a T-Rex, that's all about our misconceptions about how biology influences maleness and femaleness within the body. And in the book, Dr. Fine addresses the fact that we now understand that individuals may have variance in their levels of testosterone and estrogen within the body, based on how they present their own gender identity, their perceptions of what gendered behavior is, how people behave towards them regarding their gender identity, in the same way that the neurochemistry of the brain can lead to mental illnesses due to our environment. It's the same with hormones. So what we understand as being immutable and unchangeable, that's not the case. So when we talk about sex being changed, for starters, Maya Forstater's argument that you can't change sex it's a very strange subject, because what it's doing is it's saying that predominantly sex is chromosomes. People tend to think that your sex is XY or XX, so XY denoting male, XX denoting female, and that because you can't change chromosomes, you can't change sex. That's not the case. So obviously, yes, you can't change chromosomes, but there is not a chromosome, there's not a sex binary anyways, because chromosomes can be XYY, XXY, triple XY, and those individuals are intersex individuals who are 1.7% of a global population. That is over 1 in 100, so the same incidence rate as redheads. So if you've met a ginger person, you've met an intersex person. And those are individuals that cannot fall under male or female as sexes, because it's biologically impossible for them to do so. They can absolutely, their gender identity can be male or female, and many intersex people have a gender assigned to them at birth, even though they are intersex. So there isn't a sex binary in the first place. But when we're talking about sex as well, it's not just chromosomes. We're also talking about primary sex characteristics and secondary sex characteristics. Primary sex characteristics are, with some exceptions, the sex characteristics that you have developed at birth. And then the secondary sex characteristics are the ones that you develop at puberty. Now, through gender affirmation and confirmation surgeries, you can change those sex characteristics. Predominantly, that will be to do with your genitalia, but it can also be with the removal of breast tissue. And so adjustments can be made to the sex of a body. But even if it were that gender was sex, it's still not something that is unchangeable and this objective truth within a person, that deep down you'll always truly be male or female, because that's not the case. Gender identity is something that is, like I said, it's an interplay to do with sex, to do with your environment, to do with social constructs. And so that absolutely is something that can change, not just only in your lifetime, but several times throughout your life, because there isn't a static identity. In fact, when we talk about the human psyche, there's no other aspect of it that we treat as if it were categorical and unchanging. We don't do that with personality or mental health or anything else, so it doesn't make any sense to do it with gender identity. So Rowling's comments are particularly damaging, because what she's doing is she's reducing this discussion down to sex, and how sex is something that is unchanging and objective, which is not true. We know from decades of research now that that is unequivocally not the case. So it's damaging and it's reductive for the trans debate, which at this point in my mind, it shouldn't even be a debate whatsoever. We know that trans women are women, we know that trans men are men, and we know that non-binary people are authentically non-binary, and it should be up for discussion.
That is a lot of information. It really is. It's a lot to take in, especially if you were raised with the typical gender binary. We have male and we have female, and that's what exists, which is how I was raised, and how I think that many people are raised. So I think that it's a little bit scary for people to try to broaden their horizons, to accept that there is more than that out there. But I think that one of the greatest things about the human species is our ability to learn and adapt and actually rise above where we were even a generation ago. I was recently at a city council meeting where they were talking about providing rights for transgender individuals in the workplace and in the housing market, and they were talking about the generation gap, where only a few generations ago we didn't have good protections for disabled peoples. A few generations further than that, it was people of color, and so this is something where we've got to get on the right side of history with this. We've got to get on the side of being good humans and human rights, because trans people, LGBTQ people we're all humans. We that's what we are. That's what we do. So I think that I'm following you. If I get lost, I'll just raise my hand up here, like a student.
But no, you are right with regards to kind of addressing this issue of being aware of what it means to be marginal in many different ways. Because yes, before trans issues, it was the gay rights movement with regards to sexuality, and there was issues of disability rights and the rights of people of color that go all the way back through several generations. But it's important to acknowledge that just because the issue of trans rights and gender variant rights are coming to the surface now doesn't mean that this is a new phenomenon. Trans individuals have existed throughout history. And part of the reason why we're not aware of these histories is because they have been erased, because it is controversial. It has made people uncomfortable. That is why for a long time we didn't know about the gender history of Native American communities, because it made early anthropologists, colonialists, uncomfortable. And we see this with many communities around the world where this history was destroyed because it went against the grain with regards to what we considered reputable presentations of masculinity and femininity. So trans people have been around for the history of humanity, and it's only coming to the fore now because we live in an information age, the age of globalization, where in the virtual world and the physical world, our borders are not what they used to be. So individuals can come together online, they can discuss their personal experiences, they can share their own perceptions of their own gender identity and find people that have similar experiences. And so this ability for individuals to congregate and discuss this means that there has been this boom in the discussion of gender identity and activism pertaining to gender identity as well. So it's not like none of this existed up until 10 or 20 years ago. It's that it was swept under the rug. Yes.
All right. So that's a very, very good point, because, and I'm going to use an example that is nothing to do with gender identity, but it's something that we've all heard and some of us may have said, when things like gluten allergies and peanut allergies began to be everywhere.
Yeah.
I know I have heard people say that, this, we didn't have this when I was a kid. You ate what you ate and that was it. It's not a real problem kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a similar mindset, don't you think, that this wasn't around before,
Yeah.
but in reality, nobody was talking about it.
Yeah, it's the same with disability. I'm an individual with an unusual form of dyslexia, and my grandfather also had dyslexia, but he was raised in a generation where it was believed that was an intellectual disability. So he was treated as if he were, and I believe the term they used was simple. And so the understanding of disability has now led us to the point where we can say actually individuals have struggled with this forever. But we now have the ability to present understandings of disability in a way that demonstrates like what it does affect and what it doesn't affect. So for example, many individuals to a varying degree may have some form of dyslexia. It doesn't affect intellectual ability. It usually affects your ability to process information. But it also doesn't mean that you're incapable of holding down a job or being able to, for example, work in something like academia, which is a perception that people had for a long time, that if you had something like dyslexia, it is known as a learning disability, that you would not be able to engage in academic fields, which is so reductive. But yes, we have the same issue with gender identity, that people say, oh, well, people like this didn't exist back in my day. They did. They absolutely did. And if they survived the ordeal of transphobia and not being able to be out and living with gender dysphoria, then yes, they were closeted, they were hidden, they were not sharing this with individuals because it was a danger to their lives. And it still is. I believe in the last year, at least 24 trans women have been killed in the US for specifically through transgender hate crimes. Obviously, there will be individuals that were killed due to it being a trans hate crime where it won't have been reported as that, because there still is a huge issue with censorship. There is a high depression, anxiety, and suicide amongst the trans population. And I must stress that's not because it's integral to the trans experience or because there is something psychopathological about being trans. The research has overwhelmingly shown that it is a response to transphobia and queerphobia. It is living with the stigma surrounding your identity. It is not being able to have access to resources to assist you with your gender dysphoria. So that's the discomfort you may have with your body. That is not a prerequisite of being trans, but many trans individuals have it. So not having access to those resources, not having social support, having to be the victim of hate crimes is incredibly damaging for trans individuals' physical and mental health. So yes.
Okay, so, and this is something that that's something that most people have heard or read, that trans individuals and, well, really many members of the LGBTQ community have higher rates of suicide and depression, and that a lot of it is due to a society that doesn't really accept them and the pressures that puts on them. But I think that people have a tough time, who are not in that community, wrapping their heads around why and what that pressure might feel like. And I just wanted to say, for a white man, and I'm 40 now, I've never experienced any kind of outward discrimination from anyone, because I'm a member of the majority population, especially where I live in Michigan. But if you could imagine, anywhere you go and everywhere you go, everyone looking at you like you're different because they feel you are. They're a little bit afraid of you. Some of them are disgusted by you. Some of them don't think that you deserve to live. And everywhere you go, that that's what they're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they may even lash out at you. And that's something that I don't think anyone outside of that community can really understand. But it's important to try, because we're not just talking about, okay, well, so-and-so had hurt feelings and now they're super depressed. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about something real and tangible that can destroy people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people treat trans issues as kind of a thought experiment, where, imagine a world where you weren't allowed to be authentically who you are. And, and there's always this kind of the phrase that's used is, what if you woke up in the body of the opposite sex? And actually being trans isn't like that. It's more like being who you be, continually mistaken for another gender, to the point where you have to pretend to be that gender in order to survive, in order to stay safe. And obviously there are intersections where it's even harder. We know that the most at-risk population are trans people of color. They are they're most often the victims of violence with regards to trans hate crimes. And there's issues as well with the expectations upon people of color to perform particular ideas of masculinity and femininity. Trans women of color have it hardest because there is this idea that true femininity is something that is based on white aesthetics, Eurocentric facial features, Eurocentric femininity, which is considered unattainable to trans women of color, which is a horrifying and myopic concept. And so there are issues with the fact that many individuals just cannot be out in public. And so you don't know, when you're talking to an individual, whether or not they might be trans or gender variant, because not everybody has the fortune and the privilege to be able to be out. I know from personal experience, talking about my own gender identity, as a genderqueer individual, I often present in a way that is feminine leaning. And that's often because it is uncomfortable sometimes to be in public and know that people are visibly scrutinizing you. They're trying to read you. I mean, today as well, like I'm wearing a chest binder, but I will be going out wearing makeup. And that's not just for protection, that's also because I enjoy playing with feminine and masculine aspects of presentation. But even then, I'm only doing this because right now I'm in New York. I'm in a place which is open-minded by and large with regards to gender identity. Would I feel comfortable presenting in this kind of way in my small hometown in Dorset in the United Kingdom? Probably not. There are many things that individuals, trans and gender variant individuals, have to do on a day-to-day basis in order to survive, in order to feel safe. And that the extent to which you have to do that varies from one community to another. Like I said, trans women of color have it the hardest, but to a certain extent, all of us are just trying to survive. And so what J.K. Rowling's comments do, they reinforce this notion that you can be gender critical, as it's called, but actually being gender critical is not critical at all. It's dehumanizing, it's invalidating. If we use the term race critical, that wouldn't be accepted. It would just be called racist. Yeah. And so to use this language, it reduces the kind of the power behind it. Like it overlooks the damage that a phrase like that can do. And trans exclusionary radical feminists love to use the term gender critical because I believe it portrays them as being conscientious and academic in nature and reflexive and perceptive, when actually it is just small-minded and transphobic and queerphobic.
Because words make a difference.
Absolutely. Language is powerful, and language can be used to enact structural violence. When language can serve to dehumanize an individual, it can reduce their access to particular rights and freedoms. It reduces their visibility, which means that they can't even ask for those rights and freedoms. And I think we're aware of the language that we use. Well, we're becoming more aware of the language that we use with regards to racial issues. And we should be just as conscientious and aware when it comes to matters of gender identity as well, because you can do the same amount of damage. That's why we use terms like transgender instead of transsexual now, because transsexual presumes that an individual has had some kind of gender affirmation or reassignment surgery in order to change their physiology, which not every trans or gender variant person wants, but also not every trans and gender variant person has access to, be it due to the community that they're living in, their socioeconomic status, the laws regarding gender identity in their home country. So
Oh, I lost you there.
I lost you. Okay. Your gender. Okay. I lost you for a moment. It's all good. Your gender identity does not match to the one assigned to you at birth, but you also don't have to validate your identity by doing something to your body which you may not want or may not have access to. So yeah, the language is incredibly important.
So I can hear it already, and I'm sure it's starting up today and probably yesterday as well, but it's just a tweet. It's why is this a big deal? Well, I mean, for me, this is a big deal because this is coming from a woman who has written probably the best-selling book series of all time, read by millions and millions and millions and millions of people.
Yep.
And even if only a fraction of them understand what this tweet really means, it's still encouraging behavior and language that we don't want in a society that's supposed to love people, right?
Right, absolutely. What this tweet does is it justifies transphobic behavior, and it also makes transphobes and trans exclusionary radical feminists feel supported and feel validated. And it opens up that kind of conversation, which is not a conversation that we should be having. There is an issue with regards to how trans issues are discussed in mainstream media. There's often this expectation that you need to have an individual who knows a lot about trans culture talking and then a transphobe in order to balance the conversation, which is ridiculous because it would be considered completely unacceptable. there's a problem with the fact that being transphobic is reduced down to somebody having an opinion, and that's not the case. It's not about a difference in opinions here, because if an opinion invalidates somebody's identity as a human being, that's an act of violence. It's not a difference of opinion. It is something that can encourage aggression and vitriol and violence towards another person, which is unacceptable. And so the damage that Rowling has done with her platform is that she has encouraged people to have a conversation where it is entirely acceptable to respond by saying, I don't think trans women are women and I don't think trans men are men, it's entirely unacceptable, because that's not even the conversation we're having anymore. We know that trans women are women and we know that trans men are men, because we have enough research regarding psychology, neurobiology, to understand that gender identity is something that is entirely valid within trans individuals with regards to how they navigate their understanding of their body and society. It's not something that we need to prove at this point. It's already a fact. And so we shouldn't be at this point with this discussion anymore. We should be getting to the point where we say, how do we safeguard the rights of trans and gender variant individuals? So Rowling is taking this conversation 10 steps back, 20 years back, and making that seem justified and acceptable. But at the same time, if Rowling is doing this with her platform, there is so much we can all be doing with our own. And this is why I have tried to reach out to cis allies and say, please respond to this. Please be conscientious of how you engage with this topic, because a lot of the time, cisgender people might only listen to other cisgender people, in the same way that there are men that will only listen to other men when it comes to matters of feminism in order to open that door. So cis allies have a responsibility to respond to this and engage and say, no, actually, this is a conversation we shouldn't even be having at this point. And it's not a matter of censorship, because nobody owes J.K. Rowling a platform. Having a platform where you have that much influence is not a right, it is a privilege. And if she is abusing that privilege, nobody owes it to her.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I really couldn't. So, all right. Well, I think you said exactly what we all needed to hear. So if anyone has any questions about this at all, you're welcome to leave comments on the video or on Twitter or wherever else, or either myself or Georgie, I'm sure would be happy to answer your questions, or I will take your questions and ask Georgie your questions. They're much better at this than I am. So, well, I think that's going to be it for today, everyone. Thank you so much for coming on, Georgie.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason. I really appreciate it, and thank you for using your platform in this way. It's a fantastic thing to be doing.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to do it. Bye, guys.
Brilliant. Bye.